Hello dear chess friends, this is Kolosowski, an international master from Poland, and this is the first video of the course dedicated to endgame strategy. And for starters, I should probably mention that the format of this course will be a little bit different than comparing to the previous series I've prepared for the TheChessWorld.com. If you recall, if you have been watching my previous courses, then I used to show the entire games, and I felt that this was the best way to show particular themes, specific ideas, so that the viewers have the full picture, so to speak. Since we're talking about endgame strategy, I've decided to pick only the most important, the most interesting parts of the games, and you will most likely not see an entire game throughout the whole course, although I will always refer to which game I'm showing at this point, at any point, so you will always be able to relate to that game later on, and for sure you will be able to find out which game a particular position is taken from. And the first example I picked is a relatively easy one, but the purpose of it is to show what actually is weak and what is not weak in chess, in endgames in particular. The game itself was played by two very strong 2600 players, both grandmasters, white Boris Gulko and black Kamil Mitun from Poland. As I've told you in the introduction to this course, we will talk about a variety of practical themes, because this is how I wanted to structure this course, not to overload you with rules, with positions that require memorizing, that you may find in any endgame manual. This is supposed to serve as a sort of a example of how technically you should approach endgames. And one of the chapters is dedicated to weaknesses in overall, but in general. The first example is supposed to be a bit of a repetition of what we did in one of the courses dedicated to pawn structures, to weaknesses. And as you see here, black has doubled pawns on b6 and b7. White has a backward pawn on b2, and there is also a pawn on a4, which it looks like it might be subject to some sort of an attack. And the question is how to evaluate a position like that. As you may imagine, a couple of exchanges have been made a few moves ago, and both players had to somehow evaluate this position so that they could decide if this is actually a promising position for them or not. And in this case, well, on one hand you might say that, well, white will be able to attack the b6 pawn, because objectively he will most likely be able to put the bishop on e3, and if not, then even potentially later on he might somehow be able to play perhaps rook a3 followed by rook b3, in case, of course, the dark squared bishops are exchanged, which is relatively easy to imagine. On the other hand, it is black who controls the d-file, at least for the time being. Besides b6, his position is, I think, more than okay. He's very solid. There is also the rook on a8, which is definitely more active than the one on a1, because the rook on a8 is attacking, the rook on a1 is defending. So how can we really determine who has the better prospects? Well, first of all, well, b6 is definitely weak. but we can say the same about white's pawn structure on queenside. So I think a4, even though b2 is the backward pawn, I think a4 is actually the target. And this is when we try to construct the plan for both sides. So most definitely white will try to play bishop e3, hitting b6. Will that be the end of the world? Well, definitely not, because black has a huge variety of moves which will enable him to protect b6. In particular, he has rook a6, which is in fact a very useful move, because you might just imagine black playing rook a6, and then after the bishop from c8 was developed, then black can just play rook d to a8, doubling up along a file and hitting this potential weak a4 pawn. Also, after bishop e3, black can just neutralize this attack on b6 by playing bishop c5. This will most likely result in a change of a pawn structure, so I'm guessing white will just exchange the bishops on c5, and then we will see double pawns on c file. Is that better for white or black? Well, I think in this case, again, there are pros and cons of such a situation, because in the endgame, one of the rules says that you should exchange the pieces so that as a result your pawns are facing the edges of the board, so that they potentially can become outside passed pawns. Here, if we exchange towards the center, then this is perhaps not really according to the strategy of endgames. But this is just a theoretic remark. There's still a couple of pieces, and I don't think we should just refer to theory of endgames, because there's still lots of battle. In turn, black will be able to perhaps use the b file so that he attacks b2 pawn. There's also d2 square available for black after the exchange of the bishops. So in fact, it might be quite balanced. Also, in the worst case, black can just play knight d7. So I think there is at least a couple of moves he can make without really compromising his position, after which b6 will be relatively safe. Okay, so let's look at white's problems. Well, definitely there is a backward pawn on b2, as we said a couple of times. And if you remember from one of my previous courses dedicated to pawn structures, whenever there is a backward pawn, there is most likely a weak spot just in front of it. And this is the biggest problem for white. So since b2 pawn is backward, then b3 is a weak spot, and this is definitely the case. Why is this b3 square so important? Well, for two reasons. First of all, as you may imagine, bishop e6, bishop b3 is going to come very easily. Once there is a bishop on b3, the pawn on a4 will be even weaker than it was, so that's something really important. And additionally, the bishop on b3 will control d1 square, and this will seriously limit white's active possibilities. White will most likely have problems with respect to controlling d file. Well, if bishop is on b3, then rook d1 is just impossible. Additionally, the rook on a1 will have to stay on a1 because it will have to protect a4 pawn. So, in fact, it's very easy to imagine white getting paralyzed in just 2 or 3 moves. Of course, it's not going to be the end of the world, but this will make white's task very, very problematic. So, in the game, there was bishop e3, and even though, as we mentioned, there are some possible pros of playing bishop c5, Kamil Mitten decided to opt for the more natural rook a6. And I think this is perfectly understandable. After all, the bishop on e3 can also be hit by means of, for instance, knight g4. And Additionally, black may find some other ways to utilize the bishop on e7, and you will see actually how he did that later on in the game. And white played rook d1, which is a very I think it's a good decision, because otherwise, as I said, bishop e6, bishop b3 may come, and at this point, well, of course, white realized that the pawn on a4 is also a weakness, is also a problem, so he needed to play very actively. This is something you should remember when approaching endgames, that usually the player who has more active pieces will be able to obtain the advantage if the position is, materially speaking, even, and if there is no significant positional factors such as horrible pawn structure or a closed position involving a knight versus a bad bishop, or other positional factors. If the position is more or less balanced, positionally wise and materially, then the player who has more activity may actually prevail. So rook d1 is definitely a correct approach. And here comes the question: should black exchange or not? Well, if black exchanges on d1, he will lose control of d file. He will not have any prospects on that file whatsoever, and in turn the passive rook on a1 will turn into an active rook on d1. So I think the picture is quite clear. We have to give up the d file. We move to e8. Again, if rook d1, and it is actually black who has to be a little bit careful, because of course rook d8 will be well, just an annoying move, if not for the rest of the game, then at least for a few moves. So the correct choice is definitely rook e8, and this is what was played in the game. White went bishop d4, slightly improving his position, and now of course black made the natural bishop e6. The intention is to put the bishop on b3, then perhaps at some point neutralize the bishop on d4, and also transfer the rook from e8 to a8. White played e4, bishop b3, and I think that already is quite visible what is weak here and what is not weak. And in one of the courses, or perhaps even in both of the courses I've prepared for the TheChessWorld.com, which related to weaknesses in to some degree, I told you that something is weak only if it can be attacked, and we could also say if it can be efficiently attacked. So here, even though the pawn on b6 is attacked, besides that, well, the pawn on b6 is not really in danger. Of course, there is bishop f1 threat, and white will definitely try to do that, but I think it's generally going to be easier to defend the pawn on b6 than to defend weak b3 spot and also the pawn on a4. So you always have to sort of weigh the weaknesses, the potential weaknesses. You have to evaluate, you have to anticipate what may happen and what may influence the possibility to utilize your opponent's weaknesses, and you need to find ways to properly deal with the problems you have on your own. And if as a result you actually evaluate the position and think that your weaknesses are less important than your opponent's weaknesses, then perhaps you should go for an endgame. You can simplify the position and go for the position you have been evaluating. So there was bishop f1, and of course black could try to play bishop d1, but this is perhaps not necessary here, because after bishop d1 there is bishop a6, and well, the pawn on b7 is hanging, so that's a problem. We can take on a4, but then I believe that after both rook takes a4, b takes a6, and well, again, both bishop b6 and rook a6 look promising for white. In fact, the tables have turned to 180 degrees. It's definitely white who has the better position. And also after bishop a4, bishop takes b7, I think white is just strategically winning here. So this was not a good continuation at all. Instead, black went rook a8, and this is definitely understandable. Rook a8, white went rook e1, and now we need to find a different way to overprotect b6. Well, not overprotect, just protect. b6, one way again would be bishop c5, but Kamil Mitten decided that this bishop on e7 will be more important on a different spot, and instead he went knight d7, a very natural looking maneuver. If needed, the knight can jump to c5, completely neutralizing the bishop's attack on b6. Also, now after bishop c5, knight takes c5. So after a sequence like that, there's going to be a knight. Let's put it in yellow, perhaps. The knight on c5 will be a very active piece, hitting both e4 pawn and a4 pawn, and it looks like it might be a serious problem for white. So there was f4, and actually this is I think well, at this point strategically white's position is already very difficult. Even though he's not losing anything already, it's not that his position will totally collapse in a few moves, but it's very difficult to find a promising plan for white. He basically all he can do is just sit and wait and see what actually black is going to try to do, and then he can react. Black can play bishop c5, he can play knight c5. Both options seem to be quite promising, and for this reason Boris Gulko went for f4, but honestly this is not really anything dangerous. I think that he had a very tough choice, and he made the move that he found to be the most promising. Basically, in the endgame, you need to remember that all of your pieces should be involved in the game. It's even more important than in the middle game, in my opinion. And especially, it's worth bringing the king into the center. So I think f4 just creates the path for the king in the future to be activated. Later on, we will find out that f4 actually backfired, but at this point of the game, I don't think he could have anticipated that. So after f4, of course, black should not be afraid of any sort of an attack on kingside. This is just a move that claims some ground in the center and perhaps just makes a good impression. Not really more than that. There was rook d8, slowly improving the position. Why not? After all, claiming d5 will also be very, very useful. And after rook d8, white went e5. Again, it was possible to play bishop c5, it was possible to play knight c5. I think it's possible to justify any of these moves, but it's also very logical what Kamil Mitten did, and he played bishop b4. So the plan doesn't really change. He wants to play knight c5 anyway, but if we play knight c5 here, the knight will just block the bishop on e7. So instead we put the bishop to a more active post. We still maintain control of a3 square, so that the rook from a1 can never come here. Also, there is a very unpleasant pin on e1, and the knight may jump to c5 at any point, so we don't really lose coordination of our pieces. At this point, after bishop b4, Gulko played rook c1, knight c5 as expected. Of course, white cannot trade on c5, that would be just a disaster. Giving black the bishop pair and allowing the rook to come to d2 would most definitely end in just a few moves. Bishop e3. And now came a very powerful move, which is easy to miss. Of course, we cannot take on a4 because at the very end of the day bishop will take on b6, and materially speaking the position is just going to be equal. And instead Kamil Mitten found a nice way to utilize the weakness of b3 square again, and he just withdrew the bishop and played bishop e6. Now the threat is to play knight b3, and the other threat is just to take on c3 followed by knight takes a4 if the position allows us to do so. There was rook d1 because otherwise it's difficult to avoid knight b3. Rook takes d1, rook takes d1, bishop c3, massive simplification, b takes c3, knight takes a4. So black simply won the weak pawn, and finally he proved that the a4 pawn was weaker than the one on b6. The pawn on b6 is still very safe, whereas the pawn on a4 is just not anymore. I should perhaps mention that bishop takes c5 doesn't really bring any relief to white. Well, it's possible, of course, to take on c5 and claim that this pawn on a4 will fall sooner or later, and I believe this will still give black significant advantage. So, for example, a position like that, just avoiding back rank checkmate, forcing rook a1 to be played, and then perhaps just a move like well, b6 may actually sort of backfire after rook b1, so perhaps it's not that simple, because after bishop b3 there's a5, and also b5 is a sort of a double-edged move. Although perhaps the best, b5 a5 maybe rook a6. But this is becoming quite double-sided. I'm not really sure if black should enter complications like that. So I think the better continuation is just bishop takes e5, a move that is quite easy to miss. If f takes e5, then b takes c5. Black is just a healthy pawn up, and he should be able to collect even more pawns later on. If bishop b6, bishop takes b2, again a4 pawn remains very weak. Bishop b3 may come. The question is how easy or difficult it will be to convert an advantage like that, but I think that black will still be more flexible and better coordinated after a move like bishop d4, since after king g2 there's bishop d5, king has to go to h3, and it's quite clear that the black king will have the shorter way to get to the center, and objectively this should be winning. And in turn, if white plays king h1, then there is always some degree of risk that bishop d5 will come with checkmate at some point. So also black may just exchange the bishops if he needs to, and play the endgames involving same colored bishops, and this has to be winning. So Gulko didn't really opt for that, didn't look promising. He decided that there is a bigger chance of perhaps creating some problems with at least having the bishop pair. So after knight takes a4 there was c4, knight b2, rook c1, rook a4. So all of the pieces are activated. At this point, black is just ready to trade the weak b6 pawn for the pawn on c4. It's just simplification, and what is important for black and what he should be doing right now is to try to exchange the light squared bishops. The whole point is that, in fact, bishop pair is white's best hope, and such an exchange will definitely make black's attacking task way easier. And additionally, why is it so good to exchange this pawn for the one on c4? Well, in terms of the quality of these pawns, it seems that the b6 pawn is just not that good. It's not as good as the pawn on c4. But this is not the most important factor. The most important thing here is that once we get rid of the c4 pawn, those two guys will have a free way to get to promotion. With the pawn on c4, there's still it's still problematic to make progress with these pawns. So there was bishop b6 because otherwise, well, it's not possible to protect the pawn c4. Bishop takes c4, bishop h3, correctly avoiding the exchange. It was perhaps possible to play bishop e6, but I think black reacted more correctly, more precisely by playing bishop d5. And now black creates the second weakness. And this is this explains what I told you not so long ago when I said that later on f4 would backfire, and this is the right moment to recall that. Now all black needs to do to put more pressure is to play rook a2 and just play knight c4, for example. Then most of light squares around white's king will become a problem, and you can just imagine what may happen if white plays rook a2, knight c4, knight d2, and perhaps knight f3. Then even checkmate threats will arise. So it will be very easy for black to coordinate his piece in such a way that they will create even more threats and more problems. Bishop c8, of course, white needs to try something. Knight c4, rook b1, rook a2. So black just says, okay, if you want to take on b7, feel free. I'm just giving you checkmate if you do that, or win material. It's basically not possible to go for the bishop b7 because rook g2 just finishes the game. So instead, well, white tried something entertaining and he went rook b4. In case bishop h3, well, black is still winning after knight d2 followed by knight f3, and I think Boris Gulko perfectly realized that, and he just went for something that he found the most promising, which is still objectively just lost. So after rook b4 there was knight d2 anyway, threatening knight f3, and white just needs to escape. There is no point in staying on the back rank. King f2. And this is a very interesting position because it looks like black has everything, but it will still require precision. The pawn on b7 is hanging, and the white king is actually getting very fast into the game. And this is the point when I will strongly encourage you to pause the video and try to find the move that Kamil Mitan played. It's a very strong one and not that easy to find, but apparently it solves all of black's problems, if we may say that black has any problems. It's a very good practical move, so feel free to take some time, as much time as you need. You will find it. You will realize that it's really a very strong move. Okay, so assuming that you already have your answer, or you simply gave up. No, you should never give up. Assuming that you already have your answer, let's just confirm that the best move and the one that was actually played is c5. A small tactical trick, using the fact that after bishop c5 there is a discovered check and eventually black will win the bishop. It also protects the pawn on b7 with the bishop on d5 and hits the rook on b4, which apparently is well, short of squares simply. There was rook b5. After bishop c5, of course, knight e4 followed by knight c5, and this should be winning. Perhaps we can make this line a little longer, because after king d4, well, we either play knight a6 or even bishop e6. This looks actually very simple. So instead, rook b5, pretty much the only move. At this point, bishop c4 may look like a promising choice, but then rook a5 comes in, and in fact, black will still have to be careful. So there was knight c4 check, king e1, bishop c6. Very smart way to force the rook back to go to b1 or b3. And now the rest is just pure technique display, very good and precise play. The bishop on c8 is annoying, so we just get rid of it. Bishop g4. Rook a1 check, activity again, king e2, and here again I strongly recommend that you look at this position with fresh eyes and try to find a nice winning idea. This was found by black and the game actually finished in just 2 moves. So feel free to take as much time as you need. It's a very nice display of the fact that you actually in the end games you actually need to think not only on strategic aspects of the game, but also always be ready to find these little tactical ideas, which very often helps in converting advantage in an easier way. This is a tough one, and what you should understand that black has only one, well, if not a problem, then there is some risk that he will still have problems with the back rank. And if, say, white manages to play rook d3, rook d8, there is potentially going to be still some history in this game. So it's good to make sure that the king is safe, and also you can sort of arrange this with a nice tactical trick. So at this point, feel free to pause the video and I will give the answer. So the right move is a beautiful one. It's h5, and you might actually wonder what is going on. Is it just a sacrifice of a pawn to make sure that the king is safe? Well, that's one thing, but the other one is that it sort of reminds me of checkers. And there is this bishop on g4 and there's the king on e2. So what we may actually do is to transfer, let's put that in a different color, we may actually transfer the bishop to d1 and grab the bishop, at least in theory. So h5 actually, well, why is it needed? Why couldn't we just play bishop a4 straight away? Well, the point is that if we play bishop a4 right now, white just plays rook d3. If we take on b6, rook d8 comes with checkmate. So after h5, bishop h5, we don't have the same problem. That's one thing. And after h5, if white takes on h5, again precision is required, because if we play bishop a4, rook d3 and take on b6, there is still some counterattack. Because the pawn on e5 will actually be quite quick to getting to promotion. So instead, Meton played the g6, making sure that the bishop on h5 stays on the same diagonal. And after bishop g4, he went bishop a4. Now, after rook d3, knight takes b6, rook d8. There is no checkmate. The black king doesn't have to go to h7 and lose f7 pawn. So that's the whole difference. And this was a beautiful tactical idea, using the fact that that white had some problems with coordination of his pieces, and this of course led to Gulko resigning. A beautiful mixture of tactics and strategy, but let's remember that it just started with correct evaluation of the position. Meton realized that his b6 pawn will be relatively easy to defend, whereas white suffered a lot because of his b3 weakness and the a4 pawn. Okay, I'm sorry for making this video a little longish, but I wanted to include every single detail in it, and I hope you will forgive me. In any case, I hope you enjoyed it. This is going to be a little bit of a different format, as I said, and you will see, I think, more of an in-depth strategic analysis, and you will not really find the entire games, but of course I will always relate to them and refer. Thanks for watching, and feel free to go to the second video.